Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Explain It podcast. I can't figure out my lighting. This is terrible. Obviously, we normally have a better broadcasting background when Steven is here. Unfortunately, his baby is under the weather, but thank God that we have jobs like this that allow us to go home and take care of business. But he may be coming on just a little bit delayed. But again, welcome to the Explain It podcast. I'm your host, Ingryd Hernandez. Hopefully, with us today will also be Steven. We are going to be recapping what we've learned out in Houston last week with our amazing friends, Chai, Prakash, Drew. You guys might know them as SubTo Drew out in Houston. Hello, Rahaman. I'm doing well. Thanks for commenting. If you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this podcast, please make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Last week was amazing. I couldn't believe how awesome a conference that was ran by Rob Abasolo. The primary focus was short-term rentals. And as you may or may not know, we have Stephen has a property management company that runs long-term, short-term, midterm, and co-living called Habu Management. And so I myself own a few short-term rentals as well, and I'm actually closing on one this week out in Surprise, Arizona. So I really wanted to go to see what am I missing? What else should I be doing so that I could better market myself, better market my properties, and at the end of the day, grow that bottom line, that revenue. So first of all, I know I own a property in Houston. I have technically only ever been to that property one time. I actually went to Houston, didn't even go back. And I didn't go see it. But thank God I have friends there. If you guys know, a few weeks ago, Beryl, the hurricane, came out, and let's see if I could. Gosh, is there any way that I could fix this? Maybe nope. But Beryl was a hurricane, and it brought down one of my backyard fence, and the I needed help. I needed somebody I could reach out to, and so that's the tough part of doing things virtually or long distance. But the great thing is that I have people that I can fully network with across the nation because I am part of SubTo, the mentorship. And so it was really, I'll say, quote unquote, easy for me to reach out to my friends like Chai and Drew and say, hey guys, do you know somebody who can go fix my fence? And they got to it. They were super gracious. And then when we went last week, they also hosted us. They had us stay over. It was so awesome. It was so kind of them. And it just makes being in this mentorship so much special. So I'm so sorry. This camera really, that's maybe, okay, that's better, I guess. Anyway, but what did I learn? I learned that I was way further along than I thought I was. And I also think that Habu, the highest and best use company that's ran by Steven and Drew, I think they realized that too. I think an overwhelming majority of folks that we were speaking to are doing really well. They're running, properties. They're working as property management companies and or own them themselves. So what I noticed was the max amount of properties owned was around 5 properties that were on short-term rental. So that was an interesting fact. But it could also have been sort of what this conference attracts, right? It attracts a more beginner short-term rental owner. And then we also have other property managers there, and they had around 40 or 50 short-term rentals. That was the most we saw. Again, not that we were trying to measure, our sticks, if you will, but it was kind of cool to see how we were doing and how Habu is doing against like other folks that we were around. So to know that they went from 0 to 150 in 1 year was pretty amazing. It was pretty awesome. So again, like not something that we were necessarily intrigued to go look after, but it was cool to see that how far you can go in just 1 year if you put your head down, if you focus and like you take like consideration of that. Me, as far as short-term rentals, I have one in Houston, I have one in Sedona, one in Surprise. I'm about to buy another one in Surprise. And always look, and one in 85051 in Phoenix. So technically by the end of this week, I will have 5. So not all by myself. The 85051 I actually will own with Steven and Drew. But anyway, if you guys are looking for properties, I know we're coming into season in Arizona, and that's something that's really important for everyone to know. Like, when is season? Season in Arizona starts in about a month, and then it starts like a bell curve, right? It starts a little bit slow, peaks around February, March, but then there is kind of a drop off that happens in April. So when you're buying short-term rentals, some of the things that you have to consider is if you're going to have to hold, either have a break-even strategy or have a strategy to offset those off-peak months. In Arizona, what we like to do is run the property as a short-term rental from, September, October timeframe through March, and then March through, again, August, September, you're running it as much as you can, or April through August, you're running it as more of a midterm rental. That way you can stabilize when you're off peak and then really maximize your bottom line in those months where you're expected to make more. But anyway, but what else did I learn when I was out there? I realized that a lot of what we would normally experience as fix and flippers is also included in short-term rental. One of the most important things that you can do for your property is take the time for design. Design is going to ultimately make or break how well your short-term rental does. Which, by the way, if you're listening to this, please put on the comments like what questions you might have regarding short-term rental. I have Steven, who's supposed to come on in just a little bit. So I'm looking forward to having him on and kind of give a more insider perspective. So me, I'm more of a client. I ran my short-term rental out in Houston, on my own, self-managed from like April through December of 2022. And then quickly realized how much I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to have to deal with all the little things that guests have to deal with. For example, the remote control isn't working, or the remote control has been lost. I think I have purchased 20 remote controls in the time that I've owned the property in Houston, just because they get stolen, they get misplaced. You always have to have batteries in your short-term rental. It's also good to have like a medical kit in your short-term rental. There's always little things that happen in your property, and you want your guests to have a pleasant experience. So understand, when you have a short-term rental, even though you might be from the perspective of a real estate investor, it really is a hospitality business. It is not a real estate business. It's very active. You're constantly at the beck and call of your guests. And that part is important. And if you don't understand that, you really should not be self-managing. You should get professionals involved, like the Stevens and Drews of the world. Let me check in with Steven. and see if he will be here soon. Anywho, another thing I learned is that, oh my gosh, Houston is so welcoming. We got to stay in the downtown part of Houston, and so I can see how Houston is an epicenter of a lot of things that are happening. They're so kind. We went, instead of bar hopping, we went restaurant hopping. We went from one place to the next and had like their starters, and everyone was always so accommodating. The waiters and waitresses, or the servers, I don't know what you would call them nowadays, they were always so kind. So I can see how short-term rentals in the middle of Houston demand so much, because you have a very lively downtown area. So when you're thinking about buying a short-term property, think about how, attractive or lively that area is, where you're going to bring in folks as a part of that math equation. I recall when I was reviewing whether or not I'd buy a property in the city of Surprise, one tip that you could do is look to see if any hotels are being built. Like, why does that matter? So for companies that spend that much money to set up set up a development like a hotel, they're doing things called a feasibility study. A feasibility study is something where they spend thousands of dollars to review, is there population growth? Are there amenities and resources for folks? So like municipalities, like electricity, things like that, whatever. So do they have the resources they have to build out? There's the understanding of what's happening with the economics of that city. So is there more business being brought to the city? Are there plans for bigger businesses to be there? In Houston, it's a huge energy, like I literally have 2 electric companies running my property out in Houston, and it's because it's such a big play out in Houston, and I don't understand it. I wish I knew better, but they make a lot of money from like selling electricity out in Houston, and so it attracts a lot of folks who are in that business. Of course, oil and gas is a big one in Houston as well. So as you're thinking about, will you buy a short-term rental? I know it's easy to get caught up in, let's go buy like in the Smoky Mountains where everything is beautiful and it's very touristy and vacationy. There's also another way of looking at short-term rentals, and that's like looking at things with the perspective of, will it attract like commuters or travelers who are there for business? And what I found in my short-term rental in Houston is most people who stay at my property are there for business. They're there for construction. They're there for solar sales. There's a company who's staying at my property right now, and they're there for pest control sales, which is interesting that there's companies who will send a whole host of crews to do business there, and so they need places to stay. I remember speaking to a roofer who does business here in Arizona, and he has hailstorm chasers. That's right, hailstorm chasers. So when there's reported hails in certain cities, he sends out crews to walk and door knock those areas, and they lead generate into like sell those leads to other roofers, because one of the things that gets messed up because of hail are roofs. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea until I had people staying at my property that's exactly why they were there. They were door knocking for the purposes of doing lead generation for roofs. And my house is a 5-bedroom, 3.5-bath house. We threw in 2 bunk beds in one room, 2 twin beds in another room, a queen bed in another room, 2 queens in the primary downstairs, and then a king in the primary upstairs. If I could do things over again, I'd probably put more queens. So 2 queens in the primary upstairs, 2 queens in the primary downstairs. and a queen where we had the twins. The reason I say that is another thing that you may not consider is the different sizes of like bed sheets you need to get. So the more consistent mattress and bed types you have in your house, the better it is. So when you're doing your design work, if your property can afford having the same bed sizes in specific rooms, you're kind of better off, because then you're buying sheets and things like that that fit more of the beds, and that should help you in the long run as you're trying to figure out, like, how do you buy in bulk? How do you not confuse your cleaning crew, because now they have to figure out what sizes are what and kind of put things in their places, and that's really tough, especially like if you're out of sheets that you need to have secondary sets for. It might be hard to get to that answer quickly because you have so many sizes. I mean, think of a continuous improvement. I don't know if anyone out there has done continuous improvement projects where the least friction you have, or I'll say the more boring you are in your process, the better you are in terms of how much you're spending, because then you can, again, it takes time for your cleaners to figure out what sheets do you have, what sheets don't you have, and like where do you need to replace things like that. And so having one size definitely helps. Some stories we heard at the conference, which was pretty awesome. There was a young man, I'm trying to think of his name, which was really difficult, but he had this whole vision for a property down in Texas. And I've heard this a lot too when people come to Arizona, that like Texas is super flat. There's not much to it. It's just like a slab. Where in Arizona, when you come here, we actually have a lot of mountains. We have a lot of, yes, we have a lot of desert, but we have a lot of like pleasing to the eye, I guess, mountains. And so there's not like a whole lot of activities to do in Texas. So one of the ways that he made something unique happen in Texas is that you can build your own ponds in Texas. And so when you have a huge piece of land, a lot of folks do that. So he wanted to have like a short-term rental compound and different properties that you could stay. But again, because Texas is so flat, there's just, you're limited to the kind of recreation or the kind of amenities you can offer. So he just went ahead and built a pond. And one of the things that he mentioned, when you think of pond, you're not thinking about like a 10 by 10 sort of thing, 10 foot by 10 foot thing. It looks like a lake. This thing was huge. It was like a huge heart shaped almost looking pond. And he built 7 properties all around it. The crazy part, and as I was mentioning earlier, is that he had gone over budget $500,000, which is insane. I can't imagine getting my budget that off, but this was a development deal, and everything he did from scratch, with the whole purpose of creating like almost like a boutique hotel, I would say, but they're all individualized little cabins all around the pond. And at the end of the day, it was a huge struggle for him. He even fell off a ladder and hurt his leg. So yeah, it was a tiny community, a tiny house community essentially. And he hurt himself, and it was crazy because he thought he was going to die. Like, he had a big piece of metal go through his leg. It was crazy, like all the ups and downs that he went through. Imagine being $500,000 over budget, like having to raise that capital and have your lenders and investors still believe in you. So it was a really great story of perseverance and understanding your vision, really understanding what the payoff was going to be, because then he was able to sell the whole development along with 7 cabins, I believe it was. made millions of dollars, like literally made millions of dollars. Yes, he was over budget 500,000, but was able to sell it off at a really like an amazing gain, because he could see how in the short-term rental game in the platform, Texas really didn't have that to offer to folks. He had to actually create it. He had to create this beautiful landscape, very nature driven, uh, boutique cabin community. It was like a tiny home community, and be able to have folks like really enjoy themselves. And again, I think and this is something that you should consider for your own short-term rentals. You can actually pair your short-term rental with other services. So for example, if you know folks who have Turo is a Hertz, but for the small business person, where they have property or cars for rent, and you can actually have those, like you can house their vehicles. Hey, Steven.
Hey, sorry for the delay.
No worries. Thank you. I'm just chatting away of what I learned while we were at HostCon, and all the little things that people may not even think about when they're starting to buy a property. Like I'm about to close on one this week, and kind of understanding, like reminding myself of all the little things that you have to think about to maximize your bottom line. So like hosting Turo cars at your house, because then that's another really easy way for folks to use a vehicle while they're vacationing or using your house, and you make it so much more convenient for them.
Oh, totally. There's so many amenities like that you can add, that you may be able to get a great ROI on, depending on your exit strategy, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And with this being a conference that we went to, focused more so on the short-term rental side of things, it's amenities galore. I mean, I feel like that was the biggest takeaway from the entire event was don't cheap out essentially on your short-term rental or your midterm rental. Make sure you have the amenities, make sure it's decorated well, make sure there's themes. You want to stand out amongst the crowd.
Yeah, the design matters. The design matters so much. We actually got to go to Rob Abasolo's. We went to two of his properties, right?
We sure did.
It was a quick exchange. We went to his house and we helped him grab certain things that he needed to go present at the conference. So we were trying to be kind about it. But yeah, it was interesting because I actually there was only one short-term rental I've been to that's been that well thought out design. It was over here in Scottsdale. Kent who we know as the Section 8 guy, he has a bachelorette property out in Scottsdale, and it's very similarly designed to what Rob did with one of his properties, which is like it's got like this long table where if you're at a bachelorette, you got to put their makeup on, and the mirrors for and even like
there actually, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right, each has like their own AC DC. What is that? Electrical sockets, so that they can all put their hair dryer and flat iron stuff plugged in really easily. So it's just interesting.
Super interesting. Yeah, his were really well thought out, and as they should be. I mean, that's his main focus, his main priority, and his main exit strategy. So you want to go all out. And when we talk about doing themes, it's not about just making it as pretty as possible, because I've done themes that were a little too vague in the past where I put a ton of money into them, but maybe it wasn't specific enough. So I thought I was going for a vintage retro theme on one of my properties and did a ton of backsplash work, did some cool accent walls, all that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong, that property performs great. But in the grand scheme of it now, looking at Rob's and some other folks' properties too, I'm like, oh, it's very directed at a certain type of clientele. Whereas mine was a general theme of this is vintage, So I'm attracting people that might think that that's cool because it looks vintage, but they are going after directly bachelorette parties, right? Yeah. Or a bachelor party, or specific groups of people that are traveling for specific reasons, and they get increased amounts for that. So I have another friend in Scottsdale, Ingryd. You may know her. Her name's Carissa. She doesn't have a ton of properties, but she opened a property 3-4 years ago, I think it was now, on Airbnb in Scottsdale. And she was the first one to theme a bachelorette themed property. And on that property, she nets, and this is like a 3-bed, 2-bath. Like it's nothing too crazy, you know, Scottsdale painted on the back of the wall, like your typical kind of Airbnb, just very bachelorette themed. And she nets, I believe, $200,000 plus a year on that property. Net,
Wow.
like take home.
Wow. And it's a 3-2 in Scottsdale.
It's a 3-2 in Scottsdale. It's like a South Scottsdale house. And for anybody that doesn't know Arizona, South Scottsdale is kind of like the more affordable area of Scottsdale, if you will. It's a little bit older homes. They're not a bunch of custom builds. They're block brick build homes that there's like 3 or 4 floor plans. And she took one of those and turned it into a bachelorette theme. She's booked out 2 years in advance. People like that, at least that's the last I heard of it, but she's booked out. So she ended up opening up a second one, and that performs really well too. But because she was on top of that trend to begin with, she was the one that really got to reap all the benefits and rewards from that. So she still to this day is getting all of that, you know, dibs, if you will.
Yeah. I really love this question that was asked, and that's, how do you determine if a property will perform well as a short-term rental?
That's a great question. So you can run it multiple different ways. If you want to use software and you want to use the easy button, but it's not going to be perfectly accurate, is you can go onto things like AirDNA, Data Rabu, and you can run your properties through there. And it should give you an average occupancy rate based on the area, based on how other houses out there are performing. But some people are also using those properties during the summer because they're leaving Arizona in the summer and they're going to Montana, right? We have friends that do that.
Yeah.
Me too. So that's the only time that they're actually renting things out. So it's also not completely accurate data. So the way that we like to do it is, it's also great to talk to a licensed agent if you're not a licensed agent, and see what the vacation rentals are doing on the MLS and see how those things are performing. And then individually comp properties that look as close to yours on Airbnb, just like you would comp a regular property on Zillow. If you're trying to do a fix and flip or buy a rental property and you need to know what the actual value is, you can go to Airbnb and VRBO and go look at these properties and look at, okay, how much are they booked out? Like, what does that look like? You know, okay, I can't book this property for the next 3 months because it's completely booked out, and they're averaging a $300 a night average nightly rate. What do they have that I don't have? What do I have that they don't have? And start to really build out those lists in that way, if you want to take an in-depth look at how it's actually going to perform.
Yeah. So interesting. Especially, again, if you come from real estate and you're a real estate investor, you're not necessarily looking at the daily average. You're looking, what do I get this month? Like, what is my monthly, money? Sorry, can't think of a good word. But anyway, what am I going to get? And when you're looking at things from a short-term rental perspective, it's more hotel centric, where you're looking at your daily rates and where do your daily rates run, depending on what time of the week it is even. So it's way more in depth. And this is why I feel, yes, I own short-term rentals, but I still feel very intimidated by that because it's not my expertise. And that's where I lean on you. I lean on Drew. Like, hey guys, like, what do you think about this property? Because of just the circumstances around that.
I think it turns into that at that point too. Like, Drew gets it more than I get it. And that's great, because Drew has done it long enough to where he has a feel as well. He can take a look at a property in an area and he cross-references it with the 300 other properties he's managed in his career of doing all this kind of stuff. And he goes, no, that will perform well. Like, there was a luxury listing that we took on, and I was like, who's going to stay out here? I was like, this thing is, it's out here. It's super.
Can we take a look at it? I want to see it. Put it up on the screen. Let's look at that.
Let's see if I can even find it. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to legally do that, because it's currently leased, and that's where the story was going.
Oh.
Is that I was like, who is going to take this property that's that far north, essentially? Because it's not like it's so out of the way, but it's not convenient either, right? But a beautiful, beautiful property. And he goes, actually, I leased those other two down there at my previous company that I was with, and they flew off the shelf, like had a line of people that wanted those properties. And sure enough, he was confident in the numbers that he said to our owner, to the landlord, and boom, that thing was filled in under a week at an 18-month lease. And the reason why we did 18 months is because it gives us the opportunity to increase, because they wanted to do 5 years.
Wow. So what I heard you say is Drew knows his shit.
Yes.
Yeah, he's got so much experience that he can give you the confidence to take on landlords who may even have like a slightly different perspective on being able to, like, whether or not something will perform.
Totally. Totally. I would say the next thing too that people need to look into when you're determining how a property is going to perform as a short-term rental is, don't just look at the performance, because that's your top line number. That's always going to make you feel good. If I ran every single way that we can manage your property, long-term, mid-term, short-term, co-living, if I ran all of those and I showed you all the numbers, you'd go, it's a no-brainer for me to do short-term rental over here. I'm going to make $6,000 a month, gross on that. Well, then there's also Airbnb fees. If you're self-managing, you can eliminate that fee. That's great. But you have ACs, you have people coming in and out of the house. So you're going to have just a lot more repairs and expenses that come along with that too. And it's really difficult to, I guess, anticipate absolutely every single expense that's going to come in, because you'll have somebody that will come through and maybe they kick a hole in the door and you're chasing them for money at that point, or they broke a couch and you're chasing them for money at that point. And there might be situations where you don't get that money captured back. So those things do come up. And just with all the turnover, there's a lot more wear and tear that come with the property as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you do believe there's a lot more wear and tear if it's short-term rental?
I do think so. Absolutely.
I've heard mixed reviews on that, right? Because at the same time, you also have way more cleanings that happen when folks are staying as a short-term rental. So there's less wear and tear because you have the cleaners who are kind of looking out for the property.
Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example for wear and tear, because Pace Morby has a great line: buyers are liars, sellers are worse, right?
Yeah.
Tenants are worse, right? Guests and tenants are worse when it comes to being liars.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll book and say, hey, it's 3 of us coming to this 3-bed, 2-bath house. We're staying here for a wedding that we're going to. This happened to me. This is a real life example. We're staying here for a wedding that we're going to. So they come to the house. We think everything's great. Well, they were doing the wedding there and did not inform us of that. So they had about 15 people there. They had 9 girls getting ready. Everybody was plugged into the outlets with their hair dryers. And then they were baking while they were cooking, while they were microwaving, while they were using the dishwasher, while they were, right? So everything's being used, and it blew out the fuses, and it blew out the AC, and it blew out a ton of different stuff. It was like $2,000 worth of repairs from all of that. And then it got flipped back on us on how we ruined the wedding, because nobody could get ready. So then Airbnb allowed them to get a credit because of that, even though we were the ones that were affected as the owners. So things do happen. Things do come up. And you and I both know Drew does not stand down to things. He will sit there and he will go after Airbnb or anybody. And even in that situation, there was only so much we could do.
That is incredible. Wow. I've had one situation where they had a party at my property in Houston, and my neighbor informed me right away. So I had the cops called on them.
That's nice.
Because I was like, no, they're not supposed to call the cops on them. They didn't have my permission to do that. And they shouldn't be interrupted. Like, I think at least they were kind enough to let the neighbors know, but they also didn't think that the neighbor was going to report back to me. And I think that's actually really important. When you're running a short-term rental, you should know the neighbors because they can really help you in a pinch. There's been even one time where, like, the guy who was supposed to pick up our trash didn't. The neighbor noticed, and I was like, oh, if you could pull it in, we'll send you $10, or whatever, something like that, because it's at the end of the day, we don't want to, and this kind of leads into the question that was being asked, but we don't want to completely interrupt like what's happening in the community. We don't want to lower property values by having a short-term rental. But what do you think about what happens to property values when you have short-term rentals in the neighborhood?
I think it depends. I mean, let's look at Scottsdale, for example. It's a very, very high appreciating market. It's also one of the most oversaturated Airbnb markets in the entire nation. Not Arizona. It's definitely in Arizona, the most oversaturated, but in the whole nation, one of the most oversaturated Airbnb markets.
Yeah.
I believe there was a stat that came out at the peak that 20% of the single family homes owned in Scottsdale were short-term rentals.
Wow.
Which is crazy, crazy, crazy to think about. So that has not affected the property values. That being said, you're not getting everything out of it that you put into it. So in order to stand out, because there's so much competitiveness with that, you're usually dumping a lot of money. Like Kent, he had to run electrical outlets. There's a ton he had to do to make sure that that property fit the theme, fit the mold, right? And once it's there, it's so property specific that the resale value may not be as good because now people have to undo a lot of that stuff unless you're going to another Airbnb operator who in today's rates most likely isn't going to be buying at the increased rates as well. You know?
Yeah. So what I heard you say is if you have to theme it out and you have to make it so unique for the avatar or like the client you're serving, it could impact your values when you're trying to sell it. If you're trying to sell it to a traditional buyer, but if you're trying to sell it to another operator, it really just depends on its performance, whether or not you're willing to sell it on creative terms, right? Like I had an impromptu conversation during lunch today about one of the clients that you guys have who's thinking about selling creatively. And in his opinion, he's like, well, look, I'm grossing like $2,000 a month minimum on this property. And he wants to maximize how much money he's going to get. And it's like, okay, well, that's just a piece of the equation. I know you're looking at this from a short-term rental perspective. But if it, like, you can also make good gains and good money if you were to consider selling it on creative terms. And so I think the sweet spot with short-term rentals is finding another short-term rental operator while leveraging creative finance terms. I showed him how he could up the interest rate more than what he has on his underlying note, but less than what somebody could get on the market, because then it makes it as an attractive deal. And I'm like, if I'm an investor, I still want to make sure that I can make money. So if the interest rate you want to charge me does not allow me to make money, it's not a deal for an investor. So these are all little levers that you have to pull when you're thinking about a complex deal where we want everyone to win, right? We want the seller to make money and win and be happy. And then we want the new buyers, whether they're traditional or short-term rental operators, to also be happy.
Yeah. And it's not to say that those unicorns don't exist. Like we have a property in Flagstaff that would make a fantastic, beautiful short-term, midterm rental. And the clientele that's up there that may be interested in it are people typically with money that just want to park money because they know it's a high appreciating market as well.
Right.
So that's why sometimes in those hot areas, Scottsdale, Flagstaff, good vacation destinations, I don't see it affecting really the property values too much because a lot of people are okay with saying, hey, yeah, I'm going to buy this at market value with all cash because I have that kind of cash liquid available to me and I need to park it somewhere because I know I'm going to appreciate at 10% plus a year due to the market that it's in and the way that this community is developing. And then to them, it's essentially pure cash flow at that point. Maybe their cash on cash return isn't as phenomenal. Sorry, but the depreciation and the appreciation of that property outweighs it for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that completely. And Flagstaff, again, actually, that might be a good approach when you're looking at something in property values. That if it's like a high vacation, like really hot destination for people to go to, that the property values are not going to be impacted negatively, likely impacted positively, because there's less properties for people to buy and actually hold for like the long term or as a secondary vacation home. Where if you're looking at like run of the mill suburban life, short term rentals, where you can get the pick of the litter, even if you have short term rentals in there, you're probably not going to impact property values as much. Like
Correct.
it's just
I would
like
see it the same way. I mean, let's look at it from like the basics of what's been happening in the real estate market for the past 2-3 years now, is that innovation homes, all these big hedge fund companies are all coming through and they're purchasing all of these properties, and they're kind of like, right, all the scare tactics on TV and the news is like they're turning America into a renters, it's going to be renting. Nobody's going to be able to own anymore, right? So yeah, that does put a supply demand issue out there as well, because if all these other big players are scooping up everything and investors are scooping up everything, when something does come on the market, it's probably going to sell for a higher price point because you have less supply available to you.
Right. That is very true. So what other things did you take away from this Houston HostCon event that we went to? One of the things that I was mentioning is like, I didn't realize Houston was so welcoming. Like we went restaurant hopping and we're eating all the food because it was amazing. So kudos to Houston and all your good eating. I got to go to Aga's. So in our mentorship, Aga's was like this like amazing place to go to if you go to Houston. It's Indian food, but I've never had a chance to go. So that was really, really good. I'm on the lookout now in Arizona for some good goat chops because the goat chops there were so good. I was like, oh my gosh. But anyway.
We got to find a place.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my gosh. But big takeaways for me, I mean, the big one was being the attention to detail that goes into a property. And I was looking at this from a property management perspective, less of what can I do with my properties, which it goes hand in hand. And luckily for me, with having a property management business, I can kind of be the guinea pig to try things out at my properties that I'd love to recommend to other people to try out on their properties. So I would say the amenities was a big thing for me, that I wasn't considering how much they can drastically impact your bookings. But these aren't cheap amenities. It's not just adding a hot tub that might increase your nightly rate by $25 to $50, right? We're talking about people who are adding full-blown pickleball courts and taking up more space in the backyard and theming them out in that manner instead, and redoing the photography and then consistently updating your listings and communicating with your platforms to make sure that you're staying on top of the algorithm, essentially.
I agree. And just how much that costs. Like you have to kind of really bet on yourself that you're going to get that.
That's scary.
That's super scary.
Like the pickleball court. So Rob was showing us one of the examples that he gave. And now he's throwing a pickleball court everywhere. Everywhere gets a pickleball court now because he tried it out. He bet on himself. He goes, I'm going to go for it. Let's see how it goes. His property wasn't performing too well. So we slapped a pickleball court back there, and that cost like $25,000, $30,000 to do to get it all done. So he does that, and immediately, like he looked at his previous year compared to this year, his bookings were going up $20,000 to $30,000 a month because of that. Like he made his money back in 1 month of bookings by adding that in there and having the whole property reshot and centering it more around that pickleball court. So I get it. I'd probably put a pickleball court in every single house too if I had that proof of concept after spending that money. But I see the risk there. What if you spend $30,000? You're probably not going to get a lot of that value back out of it when you go to sell the property, right? So what's that end up looking like?
Well, looks like Jeremy really knows how to bet on himself. The fact that he's adding S&M dungeons in all of his properties, but
it's a niche market, and it's exactly who Jeremy is as a person. So that's what's exciting about it. Yeah. If you need to know Jeremy's personality, it's exactly what that comment is.
That's crazy. Of course, Jeremy, you would put a comment like that. But anyway, I am curious, like what states are known for very specific amenities like that? Like, right? Like I feel like in Arizona, in Scottsdale, like the Bachelorette thing is a thing because of just like who that area attracts, right? Scottsdale attracts partiers, let's be honest. Like
totally.
The younger generation, I have to now
say. We attract the most weddings almost out of any other state as well.
Yeah. Even California?
Yeah, well, we're not number one, but we are on that top of the list.
Got it. Like a per capita thing where
Yeah,
it's
per
like,
capita.
okay, based on our population versus like a Californian population, for sure. That makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah.
We get so much travel through because of that. So not only is it bachelorettes, right? Then you also have the actual weddings themselves too.
Yeah, this is true. So what you're telling me is we need to find a wedding venue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are money makers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. If you guys know of a wedding venue out there, if somebody's willing to sell it on Creative Finance, you got your buyers right here. There's a couple of people in our SubTo mentorship too who want a wedding venue. And I was like, as beautiful and as like amazing of an experience you can give, the people marrying, I just think about all the chaos that entails. Like we're throwing a pool party for my daughter, like the biggest pool party I've ever thrown in my life for her 15th birthday. And like there's just so much involved. And I was like, that's exhausting.
There's so much to it. I could never do that.
Mm-hmm.
That would eat me alive. I wouldn't get through one wedding.
Yeah. Jeremy said the most amount of weddings booked in a desert vibe.
Desert vibes are trending right now, you guys.
They truly are. Bring on the cactus. I just saw Drew did a baby shower too for his family, and he borrowed the cactus from Steven's office. So we love you too, Jeremy.
Send us, bro.
Yeah.
Get back to that dungeon.
Back in that dungeon for sure. I had mentioned earlier that it allowed me to give ourselves some grace. So me, because I'm like, I am able to witness the amazingness that Habu has done in the last year. And then myself, because I was thinking like, man, I'm going really slow in how many properties I'm acquiring. But then hearing people have been, 3 to 5 properties for the last 5 to 10 years, I'm like, oh, okay. From a short-term rental perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not going as slow as I thought I was. And you shouldn't compare yourself, as they say, like comparison is the thief of joy. Yep. But I still want to understand, like, is this an acceptable cadence that I'm moving at? So I don't know. Anyway. Oh, yeah. Like there's so many people we talked to only had 5 properties. Either they were managing or owned, right?
Yeah, either managing or owned. And a lot of people that managed more than that, it wasn't their properties, they were arbitraging. They weren't even owning those properties as well, which was really, really cool to see. Not in the sense of like, oh, they're not doing as good as we are. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like, wow, like you said, it gave us the ability to give ourselves grace and say, okay, everything's okay. We're doing good. We're doing the right thing. Like just because we sprint all the time doesn't mean we always have to be sprinting to the next thing. Pace actually broke this down for me really nicely, and I really enjoyed it. He goes, a lot of people think that growth, I'm going to try to do this the right way. Growth is this kind of consistent thing. He goes, or that they think it's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. He goes, when reality is you can kind of look at it like a staircase a little bit more, is where you have your growth going up, and then you kind of level out into stabilization year. You stabilize for a little bit, then you have another period of growth, then you stabilize for a little bit, another period of growth, and you stabilize for a little bit. So the way I look at it, like this year has been a huge stabilization year. Yes, there's been a lot of growth. Yes, we bought more properties. That's all great, but we're not pulling that lever as hard as we could if we truly wanted to pour the gasoline on, because we're like, let's get, for lack of a better term, our shit together. Let's make sure everything's working the way it needs to work in all of the businesses.
Yeah. And I like to call that go slow to go fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody had this really great quote. I wish I had it in front of me. And apparently the Marines say this, which is like, go slow to go smooth. Because it's how you can act. Like the last thing you want is to grow so fast that you create so much chaos and friction. Because that means you're constantly firefighting. Like you shouldn't have heroes in your business. Like if you're having heroic moments in your business, you should be running a firefighting department, not a business, right? And so I still remember that from my continuous improvement training too. It's like you shouldn't have heroes. Like if you have heroes, your systems are not set up correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, like you should be stabilizing to the point where you're not having to have heroes, because you've now put in the steps so that you have a stable and happy client experience every time.
Mm-hmm.
So you should have a boring business, honestly.
Truly. So, and that actually leads directly into another thing that I thought was hilarious. Cody Sanchez had brought this up because they were talking about different types of businesses. And she's like, people need to get over that grind mentality. Like, oh, the CEO of this SaaS company, the founder of the SaaS company, slept on the floor for 5 years and blah, 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 went through all these ups and downs, bankruptcies and being sued and all these things, like, so that they could figure it out. She's like, no, to me, that sounds like it took you 4 years too long to basically figure it out. Like, what were you doing? Were we not learning from our lessons? Like, what's going on? Like, why are we not recapping? And why did it take you 5 years to figure this out?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know?
I love it. I love it. And again, I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but with the continuous improvement mindset, should always be having retros. Like your retrospective point of view allows you to figure out, what are you doing well? What could you be doing better? And what are you going to continue doing? Like that, those are the things that you should highlight so that you can get to that smooth, point much, much faster. So
1,000%. A
yeah.
1,000%. And we do that on almost everything we do in Grid. Even with our fix and flips, like we get our project manager involved again, and we all talk about it. Okay, so this sold, we're making $5,000 less than we thought, or hey, we're making more than we thought we were going to make. Like, what went well? What went better? Maybe we made more, but the rehab was more than we anticipated as well. Like, where was the miscommunication? How can we become better at this so we can become more defined?
Yeah.
In everything that we're doing? And you should look at it that way when it comes to your properties as well, that you're holding and that you're running as a short-term rental or a mid-term rental. Is what is going well? Where are you finding the most success? How do you double down on those things? What things are draining you? What parts do you not like? How do you offload those tasks? And how can you make sure that this runs efficiently? That whole retrospective.
Yeah, for sure. And let's do a retro today at the end of this podcast. So one thing Stephen and I talked about is like a lot of times at the end of podcasts, people will say like, what are you reading? What's your book right now? Or like, what do you focus on it? Like, so I would like to start doing a retro at the end.
Oh,
God, I can stop telling people to get this book. It's such a good book. Thank you for gifting that to me. It's so, so good. But
it's so good.
it's so relevant to everything.
Literally.
It's so crazy. But yeah, we're going to start doing a little segment at the end of these podcasts called the retro, which we're going to we'll probably have to iron out the exact questions, but it'll likely be like, as of this past week or this past quarter, what have you learned? What are you doing? What are you going to continue doing? What are you going to stop doing? To kind of give people an opportunity to think through, like, are you staying in line with your goals? And are you doing the activities that keep you in line with your goals? So I really love that, because I think we need to check each other constantly, especially when you have an entrepreneur mindset where you're going to have these opportunities that will want to pull you in a direction you really don't want to be in. And so I was talking to my cousin this morning. He went to the Grant Cardone 10X business something seminar. And they said, if you're constantly chasing opportunities, like you're going to fail. But if you are planning with strategy, then you're going to win. So it's like, stop trying to chase every opportunity. You should have a strategy to be successful. So it was interesting.
It's so easy to get carried away with that too. Because even us, like we're dreamers, especially if you're a dreamer, which most I think entrepreneurs are, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't put yourself through entrepreneurship if you didn't have big dreams and hopes and aspirations in life. But it's so easy to be like, oh my gosh, I can make so much money doing this thing. And then the next thing comes up and you're like, well, that would be so much easier to get started if I just got that one going instead, actually. Well, actually, what if I did this instead? Or I did a little twist. You get too creative, too many opportunities around you, and you can't singularly focus on the one thing. And Habu is a great testament of that, because we did truly singularly focus almost on just that one thing for an entire year. And to this day, like, we've built out a team, this whole buy back your time mentality of building people around that. So that way that focus never gets shifted and you're just doubling down on it as well. But now you can start to take that step back and go, what other opportunities are out there? Because I know that everybody else has it handled. Will it feed into this business? Can I do something here's another thing. Try to pick opportunities that are in the same book is what I always say as a analogy, right? Just a different chapter of the book, but the whole book at least works together. So you're not stepping too far out of bounds. I own rentals. I have a property management business. I do fix and flips. We have a maintenance team that needs people from our fix and flips crew once in a while. Everything kind of bleeds into each other. So that way I'm never going from, okay, I have this.
You're not out building rockets. Like this
Right,
is
exactly. And now I own a medical practice. No, it's completely different than what I'm actually doing.
Yeah. And I really love it because, like, honestly, I know that it's easy to focus on the top line, but if you can focus on the bottom line, that's really where the magic happens. And the only way to focus on the bottom line is to go deep into whatever strategy you're focused on.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. All right. Well, Stephen, we are getting close to the end. So let's do a little quick retro. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I think on the retro, what do you think about those questions? Like, what did you learn in the last week? What are you doing well right now? And what are you going to stop doing? Are those good questions?
Those are great questions.
Okay.
So what did I learn? What's something new that I learned this past week? I would say something new that I learned this past week is definitely how much further you can go with your attention to detail on your properties that you have listings for, and doing it the right way, right? I mentioned pickleball courts. I mentioned amenities that would really attract people to these properties, and getting very theme specific, not just a general theme, but theme specific in order to get a better performance.
Mm-hmm. All right. Very good. And so then what are you going to stop doing?
What am I going to stop doing? I'm going to stop trying to keep as many tasks on myself, because I am totally, my personality type, what is it? I forget what they call it on the 16 personalities test, but basically my personality type is that person that wants to be there for everybody, but stretches themselves too thin because you want to do so much for everybody. And it's a very giving personality type, but it definitely is not efficient. It's not effective. There's only so much you can give to everybody, and you're better off limiting your time more so you can be all in those moments that you are trying to help.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then what are you going to keep doing?
I'm going to keep buying back my time. Thanks to Mr. Dan Martell.
Sure. Uh-huh.
It's been a game changer. So on this past trip to Houston as well, and Ingryd got to see this. It was such a beautiful moment. It was such a beautiful moment where we have built out a team in our property management business. In property management, you get consistent phone calls all day long and emails. Think about it. You have 150 properties. Let's call it 150 landlords, just to make it easy here. So you have 150 landlords, and then you have 150 guests and tenants. So that's 300 people. And all it takes is 5 to 10% of those people reaching out, which you get way more than that when it comes to Airbnb, because maybe something's missing. Maybe they want a recommendation. Maybe they want some information. Then you have the inquiries for people trying to lease the properties. There's so many moving parts and pieces. And this was one of the first times ever, actually it was the first time ever, where we got to go on a trip and start learning some extra things where everything was handled. Like the time was bought back. Like we could be fully present at this event because our awesome team was handling literally everything, which was so cool to see.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I truly seeing the light bulbs and the like, I would say the awkward being okay, like being uncomfortable. And of course I'm talking about Drew, which I love him. But him being uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't in the business. Like literally he was working on the business while we were at the conference, right? Making connections, as they call it, rainmaking. So it was really, really cool to see that. All right.
I want yours now. 1, 2, 3.
What did I learned this past week? I learned, or at least I reinforced, what a beautiful friendship we've all kind of created. Like, you are so my brother. So is Drew. I love you both so much. Because I was thinking about it. I was like, damn, I'm like traveling with these two dudes, across the states, and like completely feeling safe and sound, and just, my God, I've laughed so much. And so it was just really nice to know that, like, these beautiful friendships that we've built together. And so again, I learned that I can completely be myself, karaoke through the night and just really have a good time with you guys.
Well, that's beautiful.
And
I
so
love that we can all be ourselves truly, and we're not nobody's putting on a front. Like there's so much trust that we all have with each other.
Mhm.
We don't get sick of each other either, which makes it so much
No,
better. It's
this is
like we're
good.
just constantly having fun. If somebody doesn't feel like something, we're like, then let's not do it. Who cares? Like
Yeah, for sure.
nobody cares that much.
Yeah. I think what I'm going to stop doing, geez. I really do think like the whole shiny object syndrome, right? So we were there learning about short-term rentals, and I strictly focus on like connections because my goal is not to build this huge short-term rental portfolio. So making sure that I'm staying in line with what my goals are. So the what are you going to keep doing is reconciling these opportunities that come my way, and then are they going to get me to the ultimate goal? So our ultimate goal, and I know you, Stephen, have a similar goal to mine, which is becoming a lender, like lending the money, the capital that we eventually will raise through owning these properties, through capital raising, through all the things, and just be office workers with our lender, like not have to worry about hammers being picked up and things like that. Of course, we're going to continue doing fixing and flipping and stuff like that, but really my goal is to continue to scrutinize what people bring to me and is it aligned with my ultimate goals. And obviously one of our ultimate goals right now is to help 1,000 seniors transition from their personal home into sustainable long-term care in the next 5 years. So if it's not aligned with that and it's not aligned with lending, I really shouldn't be doing it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, totally feel that. And believe it or not, for anybody listening right now, the lending and helping the seniors actually do go hand in hand. Those things actually work out beautifully together, and that's why they're a part of the same book, just different chapters.
Mm-hmm. Totally. But all right. Well, I think we can call this an episode.
Yeah.
Again, I'm so happy that we have the kinds of work that we could just do this from home, take care of your baby, and get things done. So
It's frustrating at times, right? When you're like, oh no, my day's getting interrupted. But then you have those self-reflection moments of, wow, I get to be home with my baby when she's not well. And I get to be able to do that, which is so
yeah,
cool.
yeah, very good. Very good. It's a good daddy.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, guys, if you have found value in this episode, please make sure you hit the like button, the share button, and subscribe. So with that, we'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.